Shalom, everyone. I don't know if I should look at my watch or if I should look at that and just throw it all away and stay have an all-nighter, slain by the Spirit. So. Tonight's message is going to be kind of historic and history-making because I'm going to crash through the ice, the glass ceiling with things that are going to, I believe, are going to happen. But I will say one thing first. My wife, Rachel, was watching Arabic news on TV many, many years ago, 1997. And behind the Arabic news announcer, there was a big calendar picture, very long picture of the Twin Towers in New York City on fire. This is 1997. It was 4 years before 9/11. And Rachel was listening to the Arabic broadcast morning, day, and night. And all they could talk about was vengeance against the United States and destroying the American economy and terrorism. So I put it in my first book, which is on the table outside, Is Fanatic Islam a Global Threat? And everybody was attacking me for racism, for hate speech, political incorrectness. Then when the Twin Trade Towers came down, everybody said, Avi's a prophet. Avi's a prophet. And I said, I'm not a prophet. I just listened to my wife. And we indeed were discussing the waves of Islamic immigration to Europe and to America, again, years before it happened, because it's been going on for many years. And the Saudis actually said that we will make America a Muslim country through immigration. So don't say Avi Lipkin's a prophet. Avi Lipkin just listens to his wife. And that's because I want to stay alive. And so tonight I'm going to be delivering some more breaking news, things that are about to happen. I'm giving you the punchline right now for the end of the message. The end of the message tonight is that 10 million people are going to move to Israel, at least. 6 million Jews and 4 million Christian spouses and relatives. 10 million are going to move to Israel. Israel's population is going to double and triple imminently. I'm going to explain how this all happens. It's like a Hollywood movie, flashback. And the second thing I'm going to share tonight is that Israel's borders are going to expand to the Euphrates. And I'm going to explain how that happens tonight. And I also want you to know that, remember Rodney Dangerfield, I don't get no respect? Well, in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, I do get respect. A few days before I came here 6 weeks ago, Rachel was very busy playing Candy Crush. And then she finished with the Candy Crush and she went to review her Arabic media reviews. And all of a sudden, she yells out, Avi, come here right now. So I come running over to my wife to see why she's calling me. And it turns out that I appeared on Egyptian TV 6 weeks ago. And it was a program about Saudi Arabia and the real Mount Sinai. Now, how many people remember? We've spoken about this. The real Mount Sinai is in northwest Saudi Arabia and not Santa Catarina in Egypt, in the Sinai Peninsula. And they were saying that Avi Lipkin is a senior Mossad officer sent by Jerusalem to mobilize the Christians to defeat Islam. And I am mobilizing the Christians to defeat Islam, but I'm not Mossad. I wish I were Mossad. At 73, I'd have a very nice pension, retirement. And my only retirement is from God, because you know that God never spoke about retirement. And secondly, I am not sent by Jerusalem. If you remember the Blues Brothers, I'm on a mission from God. So I'm really reconnoitering the United States primarily, but I've been in 30 other countries also, warning about the threat of Islam. Tonight's message is going to be a little different, though, because my contention is that ISIS is down, but ISIS is not out. And that ISIS is planning the overthrow or the killing of King Hussein of Jordan, which I do not support, obviously. How many people here heard, it was in the news in Israel about 6 weeks ago, that King Abdullah of Jordan had purchased about $100 million worth of properties in the United States. Did anyone hear about that? Are you raising your hand, sir? So there's one hand. Anyone else? 3, 4, 5. You know where King Abdullah got the $100 million? From the U.S. taxpayers. But King Abdullah knows that 80% of his population are pro-ISIS. Pro-ISIS means that the writing is on the wall for the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. It will be caliphate one day, soon. It's like, when will it happen? You will know one morning when you're making your coffee. You'll put on the radio or TV, King Abdullah is gone. Either he's dead or he's in the United States or in Israel. Because we have agreements with Jordan by which if there's any trouble, he gets in a helicopter and he flies right over the Jordan River into Israel. We take care of him. Saudi Arabia, we're talking about 92% of the population in Saudi Arabia is ISIS. ISIS is pure Orthodox Islam. You cannot stop ISIS unless you stop Islam. And so the Egyptian TV show was saying that Avi Lipkin is backed by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, which I'm not. Avi Lipkin is indeed talking about the day that ISIS will take Saudi Arabia, ISIS will take Jordan, and then America has to come in, Israel has to come in to fight ISIS. That means Israel's borders expand to the east. You know what my worst enemy is? The Jewish mother. You know I'm about to tell a joke. I told this joke many times here, but I have to repeat it. Why is the Jewish mother such an enemy of mine? Because Jewish mothers want their children home, as they say in Florida, a golf cart's ride away. We don't want our children going to Syria and Jordan and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia. We want our kids home. But maybe God has other plans. I didn't tell you the joke yet. What's the difference between a Jewish mother, or rather a Jewish Polish mother, and a Doberman Pinscher? The Doberman Pinscher lets go. So we will receive 10 million immigrants and more, and our borders will expand from the Nile to the Euphrates and from Lebanon to Yemen. As God said in Deuteronomy and in the book of Joshua, wherever your feet will tread, I will give to you. And you know who quotes that? The Egyptians and the Saudis, because they know the Israelites were there, and the Israelites are coming back. All 12 tribes, if you understand what I'm saying. Now I start the message. You know, the rabbi says, before I speak, I'd like to say a few words. So I said a few words. Now I'm going to speak. Is it okay if a Jew from Israel preaches from 1 Corinthians chapter 15? It says, the foolishness of the Lord is greater than the wisdom of man. How many people know that one? And also that the weakness of the Lord is greater than the strength of man. And actually, this is derived from the book of Proverbs. And when I heard this for the first time, I thought to myself, you know, we Jews, we are wisdom people. And those Christians, they put down wisdom. That's what I felt at first. But let me tell you, I'm 73 next month, and I see so much foolishness among our wise leaders. And in the end, it's God's will that is done. And many of you always say to me, Avi, tell us how we can pray for you. And I always say the same thing. May God's will be done on earth and in heaven. Because if God wants what I'm doing, it'll succeed. And if God doesn't want what I'm doing, it will not succeed. I'm talking about the Judeo-Christian Bible Bloc Party in Israel. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that as we go along. There was a German philosopher, I know that I've spoken about this here, Heinrich Heine. How many people remember Heinrich Heine? Or how many people remember that I said that here? Heinrich Heine said 200 years ago, the world is going to have to decide between the foolishness of the Americans and the despotism and tyranny of the Russians. This is before communism. This is during the czars. The foolishness, I mean, in Germany, they were saying in 1820 the Americans were foolish. And the Russians were despotic and tyrannical. Has anything changed? And there was also a Frenchman who came here, Alexis de Tocqueville. How many people remember de Tocqueville? I see one hand, two hands, three hands. He wrote a book called Democracy in America in 1840. And he was spending actually most of his time in the Appalachians, in the New Frontiers, 1820, 30, during Andrew Jackson. And he was getting to know these American pioneers. And the essence of his big book, Democracy in America, he says, America will be the greatest country on earth because the American people are a good people and their pulpits are on fire for the Lord. Conversely, he said, when America's pulpits are no longer on fire for the Lord, America loses its preeminence in the world. So if you take God out of the equation, God forbid, then you're not going to be foolish in the Lord anymore. You're going to be just foolish. And then America loses its preeminence. So I wanted to talk a little bit about foolishness in the Lord. You ever see a pussycat? You take a pussycat, throw it in the air, it always falls on its feet. Something about a cat that it knows how to fall on its feet. And my contention is that the American leadership in the last 200 years has made so many stupid mistakes, but America always lands on its feet. Because no matter how stupid the politicians are, the American people are Christian. In other words, the pulpits are on fire for the Lord. And I'm always looking for the statistics that show me that 70% of American people declare themselves as such, that they are Christian. And so God's hand is on America. You had World War I, forgive me for saying it, stupid European war. World War II, stupid European and Asian war. And America did its best just to stay out of it, and America got sucked in every time. And America had to pick up the pieces and save the world each time. I don't want to waste too much time giving all the background of all the wars. But you know that America came into World War I like 3 years after it started. It came into World War II like 3 years after it started. I mean, for America, it was Pearl Harbor, but, the Germans took the Ruhr in 1936, and then they took Czechoslovakia and Austria in 1938. The Libyans took, the Italians took Libya, Abyssinia, Ethiopia. The Japanese took Korea, Manchuria, Manchukuo, China. Horrible, horrible wars. And America said, it's none of our business. And Americans are a great people. One of the reasons is because you have the Atlantic on one side and the Pacific on the other side. You have Canada to the north. Canada is the greatest neighbor anyone could ever want. And to the south, you have Mexico. Mexico may be slightly problematic, but Mexicans are Christian. Maybe a different kind of Christian, but they're Christian. So America, why should America take an interest in what's going on in Latin America or Africa or Asia or Europe or anywhere? But America got sucked in. You had the Great Depression, 1927 to 1939. And America, forgive me for saying it, America needed World War II to pull out of the Depression. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. And what did you have? World War I, Democratic Socialist President by name of Wilson. World War II, Democratic Socialist President by name of Franklin Roosevelt, who, by the way, let 6 million Jews die in the furnaces in Europe when he could have saved them. And now you've got a president, forgive me for saying it, but you know, remember in school, usually junior high, this was not high school, it's junior high, and there was a kid in the class who was not popular. And somebody would take a piece of paper and write down on that piece of paper, "kick me," and attach it to his buttocks. And the kid didn't know why everybody was kicking him. And that's the kind of president you have today. The whole world is laughing its head off. How could America, such a great country, have such a president? And it's not only the present president. It's all the presidents going back for the last 30, 40 years, Republican and Democrat. And so I have to teach a little bit of history. You know, the Japanese are very, very special people, very industrious. But the Japanese islands are bare. They don't have minerals, they don't have petroleum. And so the Japanese, you know, ended up in 1905 taking Korea. Do you know who approved? The United States. Why did the United States approve that Japan take Korea in 1905? Because the United States had the Monroe Doctrine, that America was responsible for all the Latin American countries. So Japan was going to be responsible for Korea and Manchuria. You know, the powers divided up the world. And when the Japanese seemed to be expanding a little too much, the United States imposed sanctions on Japan. Oil sanctions, iron sanctions. You know, America used to sell its old New York City subways to the Japanese to be melted down for the sake of build their aircraft carriers. And so the Japanese got ticked off with the United States. Eventually, according to the Japanese way of thinking, this led to World War II. How many people remember Admiral Yamamoto? Here I see a lot of hands. This is a very important name most people know. He studied in Harvard. He lived in the United States a number of years. He knew English. He knew the American people. And when the Japanese Imperial Army General Staff said, "let's attack at Pearl Harbor," Yamamoto said, "No, don't do it. It's a mistake. I know the American people. You'll be awakening a sleeping giant." And the attack on Pearl Harbor awakened the sleeping giant. And America got mobilized. America's industry pulled out of the recession. And America came out top dog in 1945. And America outproduced the Japanese and outproduced the Germans. America today, it looks like America is going into a recession. America's having economic problems. Forgive me for saying it. I'm not saying that it's my idea. I'm saying war is good for the economy. A lot of people die, but nobody's counting. I'm saying horrible things. And I believe World War III is coming. Very sadly, America had to drop two atom bombs on Japan, which killed 200,000 people. Otherwise, America would have lost 500,000 people in the invasion of the mainland islands. Now, look at Japan today. Japan is the best friend America has in the Far East. America has a great ally in Japan. General Douglas MacArthur brought in democracy in baseball. Japanese play baseball. And they're allies, and they're democratic. Germany, the horrible Germany, is an ally of the United States today. Germany is the greatest nation in Europe today. I'm getting to a certain point. When you have a democratic country, that country will not go to war with another democratic country. You know, I'm old. I'm a grandfather. You're right. I'm grandfather of the faith. I take that with a lot of honor. I was born in 1949. This was at the height of the Cold War. My family was from Argentina. Let's go area by area. Europe, Eastern Europe, was under the Soviet bloc, the Iron Curtain. With the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989, look at Europe today. Eastern Europe. Look at the Baltic states. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, then Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia. They're democracies. And they're more faithful to the democratic ideal than America is today. And they even warn America, you know, you're going the wrong way. Because they have experience, bitter experience. You know, my family was from Argentina. In the 60s, Latin America was military dictatorship, fascist, almost neo-Nazi military dictatorships. If they found a communist or a socialist, they'd drop him out over the ocean without a parachute from a plane. Even if he had a parachute, it wouldn't help him any in the middle of the South Atlantic. I met my wife because she was on a bus with 20, 30 Argentine refugees who fled from the Generalísimos of Argentina. But today, Latin America, okay, you have some countries like Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, that tend to vote in the direction of socialism. But they have free elections. Except Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, which were really part of the Soviet bloc. But throughout all of Latin America, democracy has taken over. You look at Africa. Africa still has problems. But you see many nations in Africa pulling themselves up by the bootstraps and becoming democratic nations with good economies. So I look overall at the growth of democracy, Judeo-Christian Western civilization and democracy. Where do you see that democracy does not succeed? In Islamic countries and communist countries, unless the system is completely replaced. But you saw, who would have believed that the Soviet system would collapse? Who would have believed that other countries would all of a sudden find themselves free? So I'm a great believer in God's plan and God's destiny to bring democracy and freedom to the nations of the world. Just one little point about Iraq. President George W. Bush, former president, with all best of intentions, said, I'm going to bring democracy to Iraq. Now, what was the problem in Iraq? Saddam Hussein represented 20% of the population that was Sunni Arab. And he was killing 20% of the population that was Sunni Kurdish. And he was killing 60% of the population that was Shiite. What's democracy? Majority rule. So when the American troops went in and Saddam Hussein was executed, rightfully so, and America gave democracy to the people of Iraq, people voted according to tribal interests. So who won? The Shiites, because they were 60%. And so what was the first thing the Shiites did? They killed the Sunnis, because the Sunnis were killing them for decades. So the idea of democracy is not something that the Iraqi people are really mature enough yet for. Today, we have a country called China, PRC, People's Republic of China. And I want you to know, from what I've studied, the Communist Party of China is very popular in China. Really, the people love the Communist Party. They say, we know we are lacking our freedom, but at least we're not starving anymore, because the Chinese were starving for centuries. The Chinese were suffering from civil war for centuries. The Chinese never had democracy. The Russians never had democracy. For 1,000 years, Russians never had democracy. Democracy is a strange word. It's a foreign word for these systems. But the Chinese people, economically, are doing better than ever. There is still a problem of poverty in certain parts of China. But people prefer to forego their freedoms in order to maintain the economic growth of China. And so the Chinese Communist Party, knowing that the people are with them, are now looking for what I call the megalomaniac dreams. They took Hong Kong, which was their right to do. They said, one nation, two systems, but you all know what the Communist Chinese have done to that. Macau, which is a Portuguese island there near Hong Kong, also taken over. Now they want to take Taiwan, Formosa. And the Chinese government, Communist Chinese government, really feels this belongs to us, so we're going to do it. And I would like to suggest to the people of Communist China and to the government of Communist China that Taiwan will happily join China when China becomes democratic. Because Taiwan is democratic. Why would they forego? I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, it was in the news that the Chinese Navy sent in boats with high-powered water, pumps, cannons, right off the coast of the Philippines, in Philippine territorial waters. And they were chasing away Philippine boats because the Chinese now are encroaching on the Philippines. The Chinese took over the Spratly Islands, which was just a bunch of atolls, and they built landing strips and military bases because all the oil and gas in the Spratly Islands belongs only to China. China never said, let's put together a program and let's divide it up with the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia. So the Chinese now, forgive me for saying it, are where the Japanese were in the 1930s. The Chinese today feel invincible. And the main enemy of the Chinese is that president with kick me on his butt. America is lazy, stupid, indolent, foolish. You all heard that the Chinese have this hypersonic missile that has nuclear capabilities. Now, you know, Pearl Harbor was basically what President Roosevelt was looking for, to unite the American people in a war effort against the Japs and the Germans. I think today, actually, it pains me to say it, that there are people in the military-industrial complex. You see, this has nothing to do with the president. And the military-industrial complex in America, these people have an itchy trigger finger. We have not had a war since 1945. And we're looking for a war. And not Avi Lipkin looking for a war. I'm saying that the military-industrial complex is. And the greatest gift to the U.S. military-industrial complex would be if a hypersonic missile hit a city and killed 10 million people. You know what would happen then? 90% of China would get erased by the toys that the military-industrial complex has ready to go. And I want you to know, and I want to go on record to say, I love the Chinese people. I hope this does not happen. I hope the Chinese don't make the stupid, arrogant mistake that the Japanese made. But I do hope that democracy comes to China. I'll also add, how many Americans do you see moving to China? How many Americans do you see moving to Russia? Do you know that Russia's population is shrinking? Do you know that China's population is shrinking? America's population is growing. Israel's population is growing. By the end of the evening, you're going to see Israel is going to become an empire. Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia will be taken over by Judeo-Christian forces. We will go to the Euphrates. Who's on the other side of the Euphrates? The Kurds. The Kurds are our buddies. The Kurds are waiting for us. And millions of Jews, and even more so Christians, are going to come and settle in the land of Israel, which includes all these new countries that are going to join Israel. I met with Lebanese Christians. They asked me, what does your party say about Lebanon? I say, well, I believe that Lebanon should be restored as a Christian republic. Autonomous federal Christian republic under the flag of Israel. In other words, the Lebanese will have their flag, they'll have their currency, they'll have their system, but they will be part of Israel. Syria, I don't know if you know this, Syria has 2 million Christians in Damascus. Don't say Damascus will be destroyed in a day. You've got 2 million Christians there. And you've got Druze, and you've got Shiites, a small amount of Shiites. I'm hearing reports that Putin will be out of the picture soon. The people who will remove him are globalists, one world government, Russians who want to make money. Putin is a nationalist. He's in the way. And a lot of Russians want to leave Russia because they just want to make a good living and live like they do in the West. And when Putin leaves the office, leaves power, the first thing the Russians do, they pull the troops out of Syria. When you pull the troops out of Syria, the ISIS people come in. And the ISIS people will kill everybody. And then you know what? Israel's going to have to go in. The Druze in Israel will demand that Israel go in to save the Druze of Syria and Lebanon. Save the Christians in Lebanon and Syria. So Saudi Arabia will become ISIS. Lebanon and Syria will be the last stage. But Israel's going to have to come in and straighten it out. Does the Jewish mother want that? No. Does God want that? I think yes. You know that Israel has developed desalination. Israel has developed solar energy. All those Democrats who talk about solar energy. We got those deserts. We got unlimited solar energy. And the energy from those solar plants will be able to make the desalination plants work. Do you know that 70% of our water comes from desalination? Because the rain that we get in the Sea of Galilee is very little. 70% of the water that we drink in Israel is desalinated. How many people heard that just a few weeks ago, Israel doubled the portion that Jordan gets? Jordan is getting twice the water now from Israel that it was getting until a few weeks ago. We're going to turn the desert green. The Jews and the Christians and those who are going to be living there still, who abandon Islam and Islamic warfare, we're going to turn those countries green. God says to Abraham, not to Abraham, to Adam and Eve, you're going to tend my garden. All of North Africa became desert. Their garden wasn't being tended. Middle East, the deserts of the Middle East, these are gardens that became desert. We're going to restore the gardens. And we will see many, many millions of Christians coming to live. And I know that there are many Christians who are very upset about the Jewish approach to Christian immigration to Israel. But when we have an empire of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Israel being one country, or a set of federal states, there will be room for, and there will be a need for Christian immigration to Israel. And Islam will be banned because Islam cannot tolerate any of that. This is a very strange message because I'm doing the end already towards the beginning of the message. What I want to say now is at the heart of the message, and I know that I've said it here before. How many people remember or who have read my books know that the Muslims today in America are about 30 million, and that 10% are terrorists? 3 million want to kill the Jews, and they have guns, they have arms, they have everything. And they want to kill Christians married to the Jews. And they want to kill Christians and Messianics who love the Jews. And they want to kill any Christian leader or church which is a threat to the Islamic agenda, because my wife picked up a broadcast that within 30 years this country is going to be Muslim. When I was here last time, Pastor Nick, did I talk about the dinner I had with a neo-Nazi here in the Villages? I'll repeat it. How many people remember that? I think three people. A lady calls me. The lady was here in the front row. And she says to me that there's this guy who wants to meet you. He admires you. We go out to a restaurant, have a nice lunch, dinner, maybe 2 hours. And we're talking about all kinds of politics. And he says to me, what do you think about the killing of George Floyd? I said, well, it's horrible. The policeman who did that should be in jail. You know, policemen commit abuses. What do you think about defund the police? I said, well, I think it's horrible because you're going to have killing and you're going to have crime in the streets and the police won't be able or willing to answer it. And he said to me, no, you don't understand. He said, defund the police is good. I said, how can you justify that? He said, well, because the militias grew from 3 million after the death of George Floyd to 30 million. I don't know where he got his numbers from, but you know, a lot of people in America with guns. And if there's no police, there's a vacuum. There's no such thing as a vacuum, so you're going to have militias taking their places. He said 30 million militia people. Now, I work with the militias. I work with the Tea Parties. They're good people. They're good Christians. But you do have a fringe. And like with the Muslims, 10% are terrorists. I would say 10% of the militias could also be terrorists. And you know what he said to me? The first thing we're going to do when we get the orders is to kill the Jews in America. Because 70% voted Democrat. I heard this. I said, I got up from the table. I said, you're going to excuse me. I can't sit with you anymore. He's a Nazi. You know, 30% of the Jews did vote Republican, but 70% is a tradition among Jews to be Democrats because the Jews have a universalist, anti-nationalist ideology in their blood. If you want to see it, go to see, Tevye the Milkman. I was a Fiddler on the Roof. You see the suffering that the Jews went through in Russia. They hate nationalism because nationalism is usually anti-Semitism. So you got 6 million Jews in America married to 4 million Christians. That's about 10 million people. You got 3 million Muslim terrorists, 3 million neo-Nazis out of 30 million. You've got the Black Lives Matter, which is founded by Islamic Jihad. And you've got Antifa, which are Bolshevik anarchists and terrorists who will kill Jew and Christian. And I always say, whoever kills the Jews kills the Christians. Whoever kills the Christians kills the Jews. You know, I had opportunity to be on Mike Savage a number of times. I think I mentioned this, the Mike Savage radio show. And Mike Savage said, anyone who denies the Jewish Holocaust is guilty of 2 sins, denying the Jewish Holocaust and denying the Christian Holocaust, because Adolf Hitler killed 7 million Christians in the concentration camps before he got to killing the Jews. Christians. Then he killed the Jews after November 1938. I want you to know, I go back to Israel every time, and I'm so upset that I have to get this out. And I contact top people in the Israeli government, in the Israeli political superstructure. And even though I founded a Judeo-Christian party, I'm still a nothing in Israeli politics. I don't want to say with whom I've been in contact, But a week before I came here, I'm talking about 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, the Israeli government announced plans for the emergency evacuation of 500,000 Jews from the United States of America. Did you hear what I said? Shall I repeat it? Israel has prepared an emergency evacuation plan for 500,000 Jews from America. Because if this country goes south, if this country goes into civil war or internal strife, the first people to be killed will be the Jews. And if Jews are 80% intermarried with Christians, the Christian spouses too. Okay. So the first part of my message was to give a general history of American foolishness, which is foolishness in the Lord, which means you're always number one, until you remove the Lord from government and from everything. The second thing was the coming Holocaust in America. The third thing, I want to talk a little bit about Israel now. And I know Pastor Nick wanted me to talk a little bit about Israeli politics. This is going to be a little difficult for many of you. It's in my book about Israel's Bible Bloc Party. In 1948, 1949, when Israel declared its independence, in 48, we had our first elections in 49, and Ben-Gurion, our first prime minister, could have had a communist socialist government. In other words, 67 members of Knesset out of 120. But Ben-Gurion didn't want that. Ben-Gurion wanted to expel Mapam, which was closer to communism. Stalin of Russia broke off all relations with us because of that. And Stalin transferred all his support to the Arabs. Because Stalin wanted Israel to be a communist socialist country. Well, what did Ben-Gurion do? He made an agreement with the ultra-Orthodox, who were very few in Israel at the time, because most of the ultra-Orthodox were killed in the Holocaust. You see, the rabbis in Europe were saying to the Jewish people, do not leave Europe. The Nazis will never kill you like that. Because the Germans were good to the Jews in World War I. And my contention is that the rabbis were accomplices to the deaths of 6 million Jews in Europe in World War II, because they didn't see it coming. The rabbis are so busy studying Talmud, they don't want to know what's going on with communism, Nazism, all the different isms. Today with Islam, ism. Rabbis don't want to know. They're too busy studying Talmud. And in 1949, Ben-Gurion decided to grant the ultra-Orthodox 500 military exemptions so that the students could study, become rabbis, and replenish the numbers of Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox people who died in the Nazi Holocaust. Our population then was 648,000. Today, our population is 10 times that. So how much is 10 times 500 exemptions? 5,000 exemptions. Do you know how many exemptions the ultra-Orthodox have? Not 5,000. 140,000. 140,000 young men do not go to the army because they study Talmud. They don't work, they don't serve in the army, they don't pay taxes. But the part that gets me the most, when I started my party 3 years ago, 4 years ago, most people don't attack me because nobody takes me seriously. That's fine. Let them not take me seriously till I get elected to the Knesset. That Avi, they said, Avi is a Messianic, Christian, Reform, conservative Jew. That's what the rabbis were saying. Because the rabbis didn't know what the heck is a Messianic or what's a Christian or what's a Reform or what's a conservative Jew. The truth is, I am a conservative Jew. But I am open to learning about different ideologies. I'm ready to learn about Nazism and communism and Islam and Reform and conservative and Messianic, different types of Messianic, different types of Christians. rabbis don't want to know anything. In America, you have 6 million Jews. 1.5 million belong to the Reform synagogue. Well, the rabbis don't want Reformed Jews in Israel. The rabbis don't want 1 million Jews who are conservative like I am. You have 2.5 million Jews who are unaffiliated. They don't belong to any synagogue. And the Jews of America are married to 4 million Christians, or people who are not Jewish according to the rabbis. And the rabbis don't want them in Israel. And they definitely don't want the Christian spouses. So if there is a civil war in this country, or if there is a situation of complete anarchy, and people are shooting each other in the streets, this business of Kyle Rittenhouse, it scares me. Because people are freely taking guns into the streets and shooting each other. I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. I'm saying the general atmosphere will be anarchy in this country. And the police is out of the picture. Politicians don't want to know. Forgive me for saying it, the Republicans are old chickens. Rhinos. Nobody stands for anything anymore. Who's going to die? Jews. Who's going to die? Christians. And the rabbis in Israel are on their high horse. We don't want those. Now do you understand the importance of the Judeo-Christian Bible Bloc Party? Why is Netanyahu not the prime minister anymore? Because he's the bridegroom of the ultra-Orthodox. Whatever they say, he does. Naftali Bennett, he was Likud. He's the prime minister of Israel now. Anyone who was smart was kicked out by Netanyahu because he didn't want competition. Gidon Sar, kicked out. Avigdor Lieberman, kicked out. Ayelet Shaked, she may be the next golden mayor of Israel. She may be prime minister. I put my bets on her. And I will support that coalition if I get elected to the Knesset. Because Netanyahu is totally mortgaged and enslaved by the ultra-Orthodox. That gives him 52 members of Knesset out of 120. But the present government has 61 because they include liberals, socialists, and Islamic. Can you believe that Avi Lipkin is supporting a coalition in Israel with Islamic forces? You know, there are many Messianics who were saying to me, there are only 10,000 Messianics in Israel. I need 140,000 votes. That's why my book is coming out now in Hebrew and in Russian, because that's where the votes are. 140,000 votes to get into the Knesset. There are 400,000 Russian Christians in Israel. And my book in Hebrew is for the Israeli public that has to know what I'm doing. And the Messianics were saying to me, no, we can't vote for you because we have to support Bibi, Netanyahu. And I said, yeah, but Bibi is with the ultra-Orthodox. They're going to kick your butts out of the country. They're going to impose a Catholic Inquisition in the state of Israel. The ultra-Orthodox rabbis in Israel today are like the Khomeini fanatics in Iran. By the way, I'm not afraid of being assassinated by the Muslims. It'll be the rabbis. Because the rabbis, if they say to their students, Avi's a threat, kill him, they'll go and kill him. It's like a religious commandment to kill me. And you know what? I'm ready to die. I'm 73. I've done my job. And my life is worth it if it saves Israel from these crazy fanatics that are completely out of control. And we cannot sit back and relax when 10 million Jews and Christians in America die because of the anarchy and civil war that's coming to this country. And maybe World War III with the Russians and the Chinese. I don't know what's going to happen with the Russians and the Chinese. I pray to God the Russians and Chinese will be smart and not start picking a fight with foolish America. You don't want to fight with foolish America because God's hand is on America as long as you're faithful to God. You understand? Isn't it crazy, Avi Lipkin preaching a Christian revival? That I'm preaching 1 Corinthians chapter 1 with, foolishness of God is greater than the wisdom of man. But we have a leadership here and in Israel, maybe not so much in Israel, but here in America, you have a leadership that is becoming godless. I met with some people a few days ago out in Melbourne. The Republican Party is making very strong efforts in Florida to have outreach to the homosexuals, to LGBT. I said, what? Because they want to get that extra amount of votes that will help them to beat the Democrats, who are always going to be flipping the elections with the computers. By the way, America should go over to the paper ballot like Israel does. Paper ballot, Israel's paper ballot. So that's the third part. At least I'm glad to hear that the Israeli government has emergency plans for 500,000 Jews from America. But I do believe it's not 500,000. I believe it's going to be eventually 10 million. I also want to share more of an end times scenario. Is the Messiah coming to the Mount of Olives only for the Jehovah's Witnesses? Only for the Southern Baptists? No Northern Baptists tolerated. Is he coming only for the Catholics or the Orthodox Christians? Is the Messiah coming or returning only for the Jews? He's coming for everyone. Do you know the rabbis get angry with me when I talk about Jews and Christians intermarrying? Because when Jews and Christians intermarry, that means the Christian spouse is also allowed and probably will have to come to Israel. And arm in arm, we go up to the Messiah and say, excuse me, sir, can we please check your hands and feet for the holes? Holy moly. But I believe the Messiah is coming or returning in our time, and coming or returning for everyone. And I believe the borders are going to change, and those deserts are going to be converted and turned into green. And we will tend God's garden in the Middle East. It'll be the greatest place in the world to live. Because that immigration of Judeo-Christianity from the West is going to reshape everything in the Middle East. And I believe eventually that example is going to change all the rest of the countries to become democracies in the way we understand it, in the good sense of democracies. People say the sea is rising. I don't agree with that, but I would say there are places like Bangladesh where maybe the land is sinking into the ocean. But I go to Tel Aviv coast, level of the sea is the same. I go to where my father used to live in Great Neck, New York. I go to the seashore. Sea is still the same. But if we put up desalination plants all along the desert countries, and we put up solar energy plants, and we convert the salt water into sweet water, and we turned everything green, this is not going to be fulfilling God's plan for the Middle East. And I believe it's a total partnership of Jews and Christians. It has to be both. It may be that there are people in Israel in the government that don't want Israel to be overrun by Christians so that Christians become the majority. But I think technically there is a possibility that we assign Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia to be mixed Jewish Christian, and Israel let it be more of a majority of Jewish people. There'll be plenty of land, plenty of water, plenty of garden for everyone. And you know what? All of this is in our time. This is not something in 200-300 years from now. You know, my son Aaron, who I love very much, said to me, Daddy, you're a prophet, but you're 300 years before your time. I said to my son, no, son, I'm only 3 years before my time. You know what that means? It's now or never. I love my sons. I love my wife. I'm very fortunate that God has given them to me, and I'm very fortunate that God has given you to me and me to you. And I'm very excited that we're living in these times, that we will be receiving the Messiah on the Mount of Olives. Shalom, and thank you very much.
Would you like to do a little bit of a Q&A?
Okay.
Who wants to do a Q&A? See that hand?
All right, you want to do the microphone, Chuck? You can ask the first question, but then you have to run the mic.
A couple of weeks ago, I heard that the Russians shot down a satellite.
Right.
Do you know anything about that?
Well, of course. we
I
all
mean,
heard about it.
just saying, what have you heard on?
Okay, listen. I didn't talk about Russia. You have to remember, Russia has the same population as Italy. Can you imagine going to war with Italy? I mean, what would they say in the Olive Garden? That's my place. That's where I eat, you know. The Russians are great people. But the Russians know what America has. And so the Russians, there's a lot of room here for play. You know, I have to tell you a little story. When you're a Sovietologist, you pick up interesting stories. In a military officer school in Russia, they were being taught that the Jews were outnumbered 100 to 1 by the Arabs, and the Jews won. And that Russia's outnumbered 10 to 1 by the Chinese. And so one of the officers said, maybe it would behoove us to bring some Israelis to live here in Russia. The real enemy of Russia is China. Mm-hmm. And like I said before, Russians are not bad people. They have a horrible system. And their leadership is kleptocratic. They steal.
Right.
And many people in Russia know that there are many other people who are gangsters, and they send their kids to the best schools in Europe and America and England, where most Russians really suffer. They don't have bathrooms, and they don't have electricity, and everything's very backward in the interior parts of Russia. So I think that it's a lot of show-off ostentatiousness by the Russians. Same with the Chinese. The only problem is the Chinese have to take Taiwan. Xi Jinping has to take Taiwan in order to show that he's the big shot. The big threat to America is China, and the big threat of China is economic. And if China wants to start a war, I think the Russians will remain neutral. I don't think the Russians are stupid enough to get into a war with the US. The Chinese, like I said before, are blinded by their nationalism as the Japanese were in the 1930s. Any other questions? Yes, dear.
Kevin.
You know Fauci and the
Fauci.
Fauci.
Fauci the fascist.
Yeah.
By the way, I love Italians. Go on.
You love Italians?
Yeah.
I are one.
I love the Olive Garden. We're all
Okay.
family. Yeah.
These globalists have a lot of power, and their intention is to eliminate the population.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. And Israel is kind of swallowing it a little bit. You wear masks, you have to get an injection, you have to, it's a bunch of hooey as far as I'm concerned. But when do you think they're going to open up and let us come in without injections and masks?
March.
Because I'm not going.
Hopefully March.
Really?
What has opened up now is, in addition to those who are vaccinated, people who have the antibodies. In other words, if somebody's been sick with COVID, and most people who get sick with COVID recuperate, and if the doctor gives them a letter that they show that they have antibodies, they can come to Israel now.
What about people like me who don't have or who haven't had COVID, am not getting the shot or mask and all that stuff? How am I going to get in?
Hopefully by March there'll be an answer to that. There's an optimism in Israel that we will have an answer to that.
Okay.
Any other questions? I talk till you drop. Yes.
What happened to Iran and the nuclear threat there?
We're getting close. We're getting close. Listen, Israel marches in lockstep with the U.S. military. Forget about who's the president. America has always marched with Israel militarily, and I think what we're trying to see is all kinds of ways to finagle an agreement with Iran, which will avoid a war, but these people are determined to have a war. They also suffer from a form of megalomaniac nationalism. Over here, Tikva.
What's happened to all the peace treaty deals that Trump had made with? Is that still going forward, or is it falling apart?
You're talking about the Abraham Accords?
Yes.
Oh, no, they're developing.
They're going good?
There are billions and billions of dollars of investment in all directions. I support them.
Okay.
But together with that, I warn of the word taqiyya, which means that at any moment the Arabs can revoke them.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have to be ready to be on our 2 feet for that.
Right.
Here in the back.
Now that the embassy is in Jerusalem, who is actually there?
I didn't hear you again.
At the U.S. embassy is in Jerusalem,
No, the U.S. Embassy serves Israel and also the Palestinians.
but who is actually standing? I mean, who's the?
State Department.
I'm sorry,
State Department.
State Department.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trump did a great thing. Did many great things. Yeah. Go, Brandon. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.